Hi.
Hello. We've now gone from chapter 8 of In Search of Christian Freedom by Ray Franz to chapter 9. Chapter 8, of course, was about legalism, and now you get in the flow of Ray's thought to perhaps the most conspicuous area in which legalism rears its head, and that is blood and life, law and love. Ray starts the chapter on the blood prohibition this way, quoting from the New Revised Standard Version of 2 Corinthians 3 verse 6. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And so you can immediately see the connection with his overall theme for the book, Christian Freedom, that in Paul's life and ministry, of course, the major problem at all times was him being pursued by Jewish legalists who wanted to make law an extension of the gospel, not one or the other, but rather add law to gospel. And so Paul, throughout, not just in Galatians and Corinthians, makes the case that you can't have both.
Yeah, wanting to show the balance. You know, the law convinces you you're a sinner, but it's the gospel or the Spirit that gives you life.
That frees you
That
from
frees
the
you
obligation to keep the law. So you can't combine the two. So this slavery to the law is there, and the only way to escape it is commitment to the gospel. That gives you freedom from the responsibility to keep the commandments of God absolutely, 100%. According to the system of law, 90% compliance is not good enough. He who fails in one point of the law, James says, fails in all of it. So again, the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, how does this apply to blood? The blood prohibition. Well, he starts this way. What is now discussed is not to imply in any way that the use of blood is not without its serious degree of risk. That there is risk is a simple fact, nor does it in any way imply that the person who makes a personal, uncoerced choice to avoid transfusions, or any acceptance of blood components and fractions for that matter, on purely religious grounds, is acting improperly. Even acts that are proper in themselves become wrong if done in bad conscience. As the Apostle puts it, consider the man fortunate who can make his decision without going against his conscience. Every act done in bad faith is a sin. That from Romans 14:22 and 23 in the Jerusalem Bible. Whether in view of the evidence that will be presented, certain scruples regarding blood reflect a weak or a strong conscience, I leave to the reader to judge.
At the same time, the seriousness of an organization's responsibility in imposing its views on an individual person's conscience in such critical matters should never be underestimated. What has happened with the Watchtower Society in the field of blood illustrates forcefully how legalism can lead an organization into a morass of inconsistencies, with the possibility of its members suffering whatever unfavorable consequences result.
Starting in the late 1940s, the organization initially declared an outright ban on the acceptance of blood in any form, whole or fractional. Then, over the years, it added on new rulings that have entered into more and more technical aspects of the issue. The following chart basically presents the current position of the organization on the use of blood. And then he refers to a chart in the June 22nd, 1982 Awake magazine. And in that chart, there are two columns. The first column is forbidden blood components and practices. And the second column is permitted blood components and practices. And in the first one, the forbidden components and practices, he has listed whole blood, plasma, white blood cells, leukocytes that is, red blood cells, platelets, and storing patients' own blood for subsequent transfusion. Then in the permitted blood components and practices, he lists albumin, immunoglobulins, hemophiliac preparations, that would be factors 8 and 9, diversion of patients' blood through heart-lung machine or other diversion where the extracorporeal circulation is uninterrupted.
The organization now categorizes the elements in blood as either major components or minor components. The effect of this division appearing in the chart presented. This categorization of itself illustrates the arbitrary nature, as well as the inconsistency of such rulings. Where has God granted to men authority to make such division? On what basis do they divide? Simply on a certain percentage of the total? And if so, what is the cutoff point in percentage, separating major from minor? Or do they do it on the basis of how vital a role each component plays? If so, how do they assess and determine the relative importance of such role?
As the former head of the Watchtower headquarters' own medical staff, a licensed physician and surgeon, once commented, "How can you classify an element as major or minor? If a person needs a particular blood element to save his life, then that element is a major one for him." End of quote. But the inconsistency actually goes much, much farther.
When the question is put as to why it does not forbid the use of all blood components, the Watchtower Society has explained its policy changes, allowing use of the listed blood fractions by saying that these are used in very small quantities, and that this places their use within the realm of personal conscience. Examined closely, however, one finds evidence indicating either ignorance of or a covering over of facts so forceful that they expose the organization's position as meaningless. Consider the following.
The Watchtower's strongly expressed statements against use of whole blood sound very impressive to many witnesses. Though common in the 1950s and 1960s, such whole blood transfusions today actually are notably rare. In most cases, the patient is given the particular blood component he or she needs. At the time of being donated, most blood is separated into a number of components, that is plasma, leukocytes, erythrocytes, that is red blood cells, etc. These are stored for future use. Most will be sent directly to medical facilities. In the great majority of cases, therefore, when a witness is faced with the question of a transfusion, the issue is not as to use of whole blood, but of some blood component. And all these technicalities remind me that you had done some research into Orthodox Jewish thought on this, as well as Muslim.
Yeah, I re-looked at it since, but when we first left, I wondered what Jewish people, Orthodox Jews, would do in the case of blood transfusions, because I knew that they had similar feelings about the respect for blood and, the kosher eating. So I just wondered what they would do. And when I did the research, I found an Orthodox explaining in medical terms why they felt there was no problem with blood transfusions. And the doctor said it was because they viewed blood as having life in it. And so giving someone life was showing respect for the value of blood. Whereas eating blood is showing really a disrespect for the fact that something died for you to eat that. So now I've looked at Orthodox Jews and similar religions that have strict laws about blood and eating of blood.
And kosher stuff like Muslims.
Right. And they also view it as honoring life to give blood or blood components. They don't specify that. But blood is not a problem in surgery because it's showing respect for life.
So isn't that interesting that even religions, and I think this covers Seventh-day Adventists as well, so Islam and Orthodox Judaism and Seventh-day Adventism have little problem with this specific application of the principle. And yet all three of those religions are prone to legalism of various forms, right? Including kosher.
Yeah, but given their similarity of thinking about this issue, I was expecting perhaps to get, you know, a new way of looking at it, or at least a reinforcement of the way you look at it as a Jehovah's Witness. So this was during the time when I was re-examining everything that the Watchtower had taught me.
Now Ray goes into more of the technical and medical dilemma that the blood prohibition creates for Jehovah's Witnesses in the next segment.